So I'm building a shaker-inspired sewing table for my wife. And like most shaker tables, this table is going to have tapered legs. Now, I'm not going to show you the entire build process for the table because there are probably 11,000 different videos, books, and magazine articles on building shaker tables, and the world really doesn't need another one from me. But what I do want to show you is how I go about tapering the legs. You see, most books, videos, and magazines on the subject use some type of jig on the table saw. And I've never really been a big fan of that method. I don't like using jigs, and for the most part, I don't use my table saw for anything other than cutting sheet goods. In fact, until I started building the kitchen that I'm working on now, I didn't even own a table saw for the last 20 years. So what I thought I could show you today is 4 different ways to taper table legs without the use of a table saw. So the most important thing is going to be the layout. So I start by locating where the apron's going to be. This is one of the front legs. You can see here I'm going to have a piece that goes on the top and another piece that goes here that's going to create an opening for a drawer, and then here's the side apron that goes from the front to the back. This line along the bottom denotes the height of that table apron. So I'm going to start my taper down about 3/4 of an inch from the bottom of the apron, and this is going to give me a little bit of room to play. Now I'll transfer that line all the way around. In fact, I really only need to transfer it to the inside faces because I'm only making the taper on 2 sides. But we'll transfer it all the way around anyway, just so we have a visual reference on all 4 sides. So now I have to determine where I'm going to taper to. So this is about 1 7/8 inches up here at the top. At the bottom, I want to taper it down about 1 1/4 inches. So again, I'm tapering this face here, the inside face, and this inside face. So I need to measure 1 1/4 inches off of the outside faces. So to do that, I'll set my square to 1 1/4 inches. We'll come in 1 1/4 inches from this outside face and 1 1/4 inches from this outside face. Transfer those lines down. Okay, and this material here will get cut away, and this will be the bottom of the foot. Now to pencil in the taper, I'm going to transfer that location to the face. I'll take my long straight edge, and remember this area here is going to get cut away. So I might have to block your view with the straight edge here, but we'll do the other side and you'll get to see that. So I'm just going to use my straight edge to connect these lines. Now you want to keep in mind that when we cut away the first edge, this layout line is going to go away. So that's what's going to be removed. So I'll do the same thing on this side. So now you can see on this side, there's my taper. And again, as we taper the one side, we're going to lose this layout line. So really, you only have to do this on one side. But lay out your taper on all 4 of your legs so that you can make sure you've got everything nice and even before you move on to the next step. So once I've finished the layout, we can go ahead and start to cut these tapers out. Now, one quick note, I have laid out the tapers on all 4 faces. And the reason for this is because when doing this by hand, I want a reference to help me to gauge square while I'm tapering these legs. I can just use a square and check, but the pencil line gives me something to work to that makes this a little bit easier. So now we can go and start to cut these out. Method number one is going to be the simplest, and that's to use the bandsaw. So typically when I cut tapers on the bandsaw, I don't use any kind of fence or guide. I'll just go ahead, draw in my tapers on the leg, and then cut them freehand, staying about a 32nd to a 1/16 of an inch outside of my line, on the waist side of course, so that I have a little bit of room to clean up with the hand plane later. And then after I've finished cutting the first side, I'll draw the taper back in on that cut face that I cut off the first time, and then I can go in and cut the second taper. So the next simplest way, if you don't have a bandsaw, is just to use a handsaw. And this is going to proceed pretty much exactly the same way as I did with the bandsaw. So just like sawing the tapers out on the bandsaw, I'm going to stay about a 1/16 to a 32nd away from my layout line so that I can clean up the cut line with a hand plane later. And I do this in sections of the bench vise so that I don't have too much of the leg sticking out of the bench vise at any one time. I want that support. And I'll continue to move the leg up in the vise until I get all the way through the cut. And then just like with the bandsaw, I'll redraw the layout line on the cut face, and then I can put that back in the vise and saw the second taper. Method number three is probably one of the most fun ways to do this, and that is to use a draw knife. Using the draw knife, I guess you could say, is the method that involves the most amount of risk out of all of these methods. Because you're not sawing, you're cutting with the knife, you really have to pay attention to the grain direction, because if you're not careful, you can split a big chunk of the leg out instead of slicing it off. And this is particularly the case with this splintery chestnut that I'm using here. But again, I'll do just like I did with the other legs, get one face tapered, redraw that taper, and then taper the second face. Of course, probably the least risky way to go about roughing in tapers is just to use a coarsely set jack plane. Of course, all these methods are really just for roughing in the tapers. They're still going to need to be refined and smoothed out and straightened with a plane. And I prefer a longer plane for that, something in a joiner plane size. Now you can use your jack plane just by reducing the cut a little bit, but my jack planes all have a pretty significant camber on the iron, and I want this surface to be pretty flat. So I choose to go to an iron with less camber and a longer sole. That way I can make this taper a little bit straighter. And when I'm roughing in with a jack plane, I also just do one taper at a time. There's no point in roughing this one in, redrawing the line, and roughing the other one in when I have to come right back with the plane again to smooth and straighten this out. So since I'm planing anyway, I'll just go ahead and straighten this side before I rough in the second taper. So the nice thing about using a plane is when you're done with the joiner, you're pretty much done with the leg. You might have to do a little bit of smoothing right before you do your assembly, but for the most part, that leg is done. It doesn't really need any more refining. The other three, however, they're still in the rough state, so I've got a little bit more work to do on these. So there you go. 4 different methods for tapering legs without a table saw. And it didn't take me any more than about an hour to do all 4 legs. And that was including the time that I had to stop and set up the camera and switch tools. So if I'd have just stuck with a single tool and blasted through these, 20 minutes to a half hour, probably have all these 4 legs tapered, no problem. So if you don't have a table saw, give these methods a try.